There is a hearth in the low kitchen of Dunkero that I kneel at once a year, on the longest day, and let my wife press a little ash to the backs of my hands with her own thumb. My counsel calls it a strange humility in a king. It is not humility. It is memory. It is the mark of the year I very nearly rode home with the wrong woman on my arm and left the right one on her knees at these same gray stones, and never once knew what I had let slip through my hands. Let me tell it the way it happened, so you understand how close a fool can come to losing the only good thing the world has to offer him. I did not want a Luna. I want that plain from the start, because it is the truest thing about the man I was. My father had died with my mother's name still on his lips 40 years after the fever took her, and I had watched what a bond does to a man when it breaks, and I had decided in the cold, sure way a young king decides things, that I would rule alone and keep the wound out of my house. For 11 years the council let me. In the 12th they stopped asking and started arranging, because a kingdom without an heir is a kingdom the neighbors begin to measure, and Heinrich was mine to keep whole. So the old rite was called. On the longest day, when the sun sits highest over the pine hills and the light will not go down until a man is tired of it, the great vassal holds bring their worthy daughters to Dunkero, and the king is expected to choose. My War Master Kale, who had bled beside me and earned the right to speak plainly, told me on the ride down that I would choose someone that day whether my heart came along or not. "Pick a kind one, Torin," he said. "A kind one you can live beside. That is the whole of the wisdom I have." Dunkero sat in a fold of the hills, a gray stone hold with a hall that could seat 300 and a hearth in the low kitchen, old enough that the fire had blackened the lintel to the color of a moonless night. Lady Idny held it as chatelaine for her absent lord husband, and she met me at the gate with her daughter Rhea at her shoulder, both of them turned out in the deep green of the hold, both of them smiling the smile that women learn to wear when a king rides in, and their whole future is in his glance. Rhea was lovely. I will not pretend otherwise, because the truth is what makes the rest of it mean anything. She was tall and clear-eyed, and she spoke well, and when she walked the length of the hall the light seemed to have been hung for her. Idny had spent years building her toward this day the way a mason builds toward a keystone, and she watched me watch her daughter with the still, patient hunger of a woman who believes she has already won. The daughters were presented at midday. There were 9 of them, the flowers of 9 holds, and I stood on the dais and let them come to me one by one and say the things young women say, and I felt nothing. Not coldness, I was courteous. I have never in my life been cruel to a woman who did me no wrong, but nothing that lit. Rhea last and best, and Idny's chin lifting a fraction as her daughter curtsied, and Kale at my elbow murmuring, "There, that one, be done." And then a serving girl came out of the low door at the side of the hall with a jug of watered wine, keeping to the wall the way the household folk are trained to, invisible as the stone, and my whole life turned over in my chest without making a sound. I want to be honest about what it was, because so much has been said of the bond, most of it by people who have never felt it. It was not thunder. My wolf did not rise or surge or howl. It was quieter and far worse than that. It was the feeling of a lock you did not know was in you, turning, the feeling of a man who has been standing his whole life being told at last that he may sit down. I looked at a girl in a gray shift with ash smudged along one forearm and a smudge of it on her jaw where she had pushed her hair back with the wrong hand, and I knew her name before she spoke it, the way you know the word for water. Every voice in that hall went thin and far away, and the only sound left in the world was the small sound of her breathing as she poured. She felt it too. I saw it strike her. The jug tipped a hair too far and a thread of wine ran down over her knuckles, and she caught herself and did not spill, and she lifted her eyes and found me looking, and the color went out of her face and then came back all at once, and for the length of one breath there were only the 2 of us in a hall of 300 souls. "Girl," Idny's voice sharp as a struck flint, "you forget yourself, the hearth now." The girl set the jug down on the sideboard with hands that were steady only because she made them so, and she bowed her head, and she turned to go. "A moment," I said. The hall stilled. It is a strange power to be able to still a room with 2 words, and I had grown careless with it. Ideni's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "Your Grace," she said, "she is nothing. A hearth girl. A foundling we took in out of charity. She has no wolf, no name, no house. She belongs to the fires. You do her too much honor to notice her." "What is your name?" I said to the girl, past the chatelaine as if the chatelaine were a curtain. The girl looked at me. She had a stillness in her that the 9 flowers of the 9 holds had none of them owned, a stillness that came not from being sure of her place but from having been given the lowest place there was and having decided, somewhere far down, that it would not bend her. "Wenna, your Grace," she said. Her voice was low and even. "They call me the Ash Girl. Wenna is my name." "Wenna," I said, and the saying of it did something to the bottom of my chest that I had spent 11 years making sure nothing could do. "You need not go to the hearth." "She does, your Grace." Idni stepped in smoothly, gently, the way you gather a strayed guest back toward the table. "It is the law of the hold and older than the hold. A hearth-bound servant belongs to the hearth. She cannot stand in the hall as a guest. She cannot be presented. She cannot be chosen. It is not cruelty. It is simply what she is. And you have 9 worthy daughters here who have waited all their lives for this day." Her hand found her own daughter's shoulder. "Rhea has waited." I looked at Rhea, who to her credit had the grace to look uncomfortable, and I looked at the 9, and I looked at the girl with ash on her jaw, and Kale's low voice came at my ear, meaning to save me. "Torin, not this. Whatever it is, not this. Choose and be gone." I have thought since about how near I came to doing what he asked. A king learns to distrust the thing that moves him, because a king who follows every pull leaves a trail of burned bridges behind him. I nearly nodded. I nearly said Rhea's name and let the girl go back to the fire and rode home and never knew. Instead I said, "Let her stay in the hall while I think. That is not a claim, Lady Ideni. It is a king's leave to a servant to stand out of the smoke for an hour. And because there is no law in any hold that lets a chatelaine refuse a king so small a thing, Wenna stayed and stood against the wall, and the feast went on around her. And I did not choose anyone that day, which sent Ideni to her rooms white with a fury she was far too clever to show. I told Kale I would give it 3 days. 3 days is what the right allowed a king who could not decide. He looked at me the way a man looks at a friend who has walked out onto ice, and he said nothing, which from Kale was a whole argument. That night I could not sleep, and a king who cannot sleep in a strange hold walks it, and so I found the low kitchen, following the one light still burning in a house gone dark. She was there. Of course she was there. She was banking the great hearth for the night, feeding it down to coals with the unhurried care of someone who has done a thing 10,000 times and found, somewhere in the 10,000, a way to make it hers. She did not startle when I came in. She looked up and she looked back at the fire and she said, "You should not be here, your Grace. It will make trouble for me and none for you. That is how trouble is shared in a hold." "Then I will make it an order that I came," I said, "and take the trouble onto myself." "You cannot take my trouble onto yourself," she said, not unkindly. "That is the one thing your crown cannot do." She set the poker down and folded her hands, ash gray to the wrist, and looked at me full on, and there was no fear in it and no scheming in it, only a tiredness worn very smooth, and underneath the tiredness, something watchful and unbroken that I wanted, absurdly, to sit down beside for the rest of my life. "Say what you came to say, and let me finish and go." So I sat, a king on a scullery stool, and I said the truest thing I had. I felt something in the hall today that I have spent my whole life making certain I would never feel. I do not understand it and I do not trust it, and I will not act on it in a way that costs you and not me. But I could not choose another woman while it was in the room. So I am asking you, not ordering, who are you? And she told me, not because I was a king. I think she told me because it was the deep middle of the night and the fire was low, and I had asked her a question no one in that hold had asked her in the whole of her life. She had been left at Dunkero's gate as an infant in a hard winter 22 years before, wrapped in a burned cloak, with no token and no letter, in the same season that the far hold of the Vale and Lunas had gone up in the night and taken its whole line with it. The last of the old Luna houses, the Moon Blood, gone to ash in an hour, and no survivor ever found. The kitchen women had taken her in and raised her to the work, and because she had never shown a wolf they had decided she was human-born and hearth-bound, and the years had made that decision into a law, and the law had made her into furniture. "They are not wicked," she said when I made a sound in my throat. "Do not think it. Idny is hard and she wants for her daughter what any mother wants. The cook was good to me. The stable boys shared their bread. It is only that no one ever needed me to be anything but the Ash Girl, and so I never was." She looked at her own hands. "There is a shrine below the hold. The old moon shrine, from before the Valen line fell. Everyone else forgets it, because no Luna has sat in these hills in 20 years, and the fashion is to forget the fallen. I tend it. I do not know why. I have tended it since I was small enough to hide there. It is the only place in Dunkero that is only mine." "Show me," I said. She should not have. It broke every rule that held her life together. But I think a part of her, that watchful, unbroken part, had been waiting her whole life for one person to say "show me" and mean it. And so she took a candle and led me down a stair behind the buttery that no one had swept but her in a generation, into a small stone room where a moon was carved into the far wall, and on a plinth beneath it sat a seal, a disk of pale gray stone the size of a man's palm, worked with the old moon and antler of a Luna house. So cold and so dull that a stranger would have taken it for a doorstop. "The gray seal," she said. It knew the Vale and blood. When a true daughter of the house pressed her hand to it, it woke, so the old kitchen tales say. It has been dark my whole life. Everyone with the right to wake it burned. She touched it, the way you touch a thing you love that has never once answered you. I keep it clean. It seems a shame to let a dead house go dusty as well as gone. I looked at the burned cloak she had shown me, kept folded in a niche, the only thing she owned from before her life began. I looked at the shape of her jaw and the set of her eyes, which I had been telling myself all evening only resembled the old carved Lunas in Harwich's hall, and which I now understood did not resemble them so much as continue them. And I did the thing a king should never do on a feeling. I hoped. "Wenna," I said, "press your hand to it now, while no one is here to see, so that if I am a fool only I will know it." She did not want to. She had spent her life not hoping, and I was asking her to gamble the one small piece she had. But she looked at me, and whatever she saw made her brave, and she laid her ash-gray hand flat against the cold gray stone. The seal woke. It did not blaze. Nothing in that whole long day blazed. That was not the shape of it. A warmth came up in the stone from somewhere very deep, the way a hearthstone holds the day's heat long after dark, and the carved moon on the wall filled slowly with a light like the light behind clouds, and along the inside of Wenna's wrist a mark came up warm and pale under the skin. The moon and antler of a house that had been dead for 20 years, blooming on the arm of a girl the world had decided was no one. She made a small sound and pulled her hand back and stared at it, at the mark warming and fading on her own wrist, and then she looked at me with the whole of her life breaking open behind her eyes, and I understood that I was watching a person learn, at 22, that she was real. "It is a trick," she whispered. "It has to be. I am the Ash Girl." "You are the last daughter of the Vale and Lunas," I said, and my voice was not steady. "You were carried out of a burning hold and hidden in the one place no enemy would think to look for a Luna in the ashes, and I did not choose you today because I am a king and a fool who distrusts his own heart. I felt the bond strike in that hall, Wenna. I have felt it for one woman in my whole life, and it is you, and it does not care that you carry a jug or that they put you by the fire. Neither do I." She began to cry then, without covering her face, standing straight in the little shrine with the seal glowing behind her, and I did the only right thing I did that whole night. I did not touch her. I let her have it. A grief and a joy that big has to be let alone to do its work. And a man who loves a woman learns fast that there is a courage in keeping your hands to yourself. I will not be believed, she said at last. A seal in a cellar and a mark that fades. Idni will call it candle shadow. They will send me back to the hearth, and now I will know what I lost, and that is worse than never knowing. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist over the mark as if to rub it out. You should go home, your grace. Choose Rhea. She is kind under the polish, truly, and she will make you a good Luna, and I will bank your fires when you visit, and I will be glad you passed through, because for one night someone asked me my name. She smiled, and it was the bravest and most terrible thing I have ever seen a person do. That is more than most Ash girls get. I have replayed that moment more times than I can count. It is the hinge of my whole life. And what I did was the one thing I had never done. I let the feeling win, all the way in front of witnesses, where it would cost me and not her. No, I said. We do this in the hall, in the light, before them all, not in a cellar where they can call it a shadow. On the longest day, when the whole hold is gathered and the light will not go down, we do it where it cannot be unseen. They will humiliate you, she said, a king who claims the Ash girl. Then let them try, I said, and let us see who is humiliated when the light comes up. The feast of the longest day was the great one, 3 days on from the choosing, the hall packed and the doors thrown open to the endless amber evening. Idni had it all in hand. She had heard, of course, a hold has ears in its walls, that the king had lingered over the hearth girl, and she had decided the way a clever woman decides, that the thing to do was to make the day so much Rhea's that no doubt could stand up in it. Rhea was placed at my right. The old betrothal words were readied. The 9 holds were watching, and Wenna was nowhere, because Idni had had her set to the kitchens that morning with the whole feast to carry, and no leave to enter the hall as anything but a pair of hands. I let it run almost to the end. I let Idni believe she had won, because I wanted the turn to be clean and I wanted the law itself in the room when I broke it. When the hall was full and the toasts were done, and the chatelaine rose, radiant, to speak the words that would join Rhea's hand to mine, I stood first, and stilled the room again with the old 2 words, and I said, before any hand is joined, I would settle a matter of law. Bring the hearth servant Wenna into the hall. The silence changed its color. Idni's face was a marvel of control. Your grace, she is bound to the hearth. She cannot stand in the hall. Then let us look at that law together, I said, since it is about to touch a king's business. They brought her in, still in her gray shift, ash on her hands from the feast fires, and the hall did what halls do, a low ripple of laughter and pity, the sound of 300 people agreeing without a word on who mattered and who did not. Wenna crossed the whole length of it under that sound with her head level and her back straight, and I watched the 9 flowers of the 9 holds, and I watched Rhea, and I saw, on more than one face, the discomfort of decent people who have laughed at a thing and are not sure, suddenly, that they should have. Lady Idni, I said, by what law is this woman bound to the hearth? By custom, your grace. A foundling of no wolf and no house. Of no house, I said. There is the whole of it, is it not? No house, so if she had a house the law would not hold her. I let that sit. Wenna, your wrist. She held it out, into the long amber light that poured through the western doors and would not go down, and I took the gray seal from beneath my cloak, where I had carried it up from the shrine that morning with the old shrine warden as my witness, and I set it in her open palm before them all. It woke in the light. It is one thing in a cellar by a candle. It is another in a hall of 300 with the longest day pouring gold through the doors, the pale stone warming, the moon and antler filling with that light behind clouds glow, and the same mark rising warm and unmistakable along the inside of her wrist, the sigil of the Valen Lunas, the moon blood, the last of the old houses, blooming on the Ash girl's arm where the whole hall could see it, and no one could name it a shadow. An old man near the front, who had been a boy when the Valen hold burned, went down slowly onto one knee without seeming to decide to, and put his hand over his mouth. And I heard him say, into the silence, the name of the fallen house like a prayer he had thought he would never say again. "She has no house," I said into that silence. "She has the oldest house in these hills. She was carried out of the fire that took the Valen line, and hidden in the safest place a burning world could offer, the ashes of a servant's hearth, where no enemy would ever stoop to look for a Luna. For 22 years she has kept the shrine of a house everyone else forgot, not knowing it was her own. She is not bound to your hearth, Lady Idne. She never was. A daughter of a Luna house cannot be bound to anything." I turned to the hall. "And by the first law of Hyrich, the moon blood is free. So let it be said plainly, before I speak one word of my own heart. Wenna of the Valen line is free of the hearth, free of Dunkero, free of every claim any of you ever laid on her. Whatever she does next, she does as a free woman, or I will know the reason why." That was the part I had lain awake 3 nights to be sure of. Not the claiming, the freeing. Because a king who takes a woman up out of the ashes and onto his arm has only moved her from one man's keeping to another's if he does not first set her free to say no. So I set her free in front of them all, and only then did I turn to her, and I came down off the dais, and I did the thing that they still speak of in these hills, that Kale says undid the last of my dignity and made the rest of my reign, both in the same breath. I knelt, a king, on the stones of Dunkero's hall on the longest day, before the ash girl he had just made free. "Wenna," I said low, but the hall was so silent it carried to the doors. "I felt the bond strike 3 nights ago, and I distrusted it, because I am a man who has spent his life distrusting the things that could hurt him. I distrust it no longer. You are free, free to bank another man's fires, free to take your house's lands, free to walk out of this hall tonight and never think of me again, and I will make certain no one stops you. Or you are free to come to Hyrich, not as anyone's servant and not as anyone's prize, but as its Luna and its queen and mine, because I would rather rule beside you than rule the world alone, and I have tried the second one for 11 years and found it cold. The choice is yours. It has never once in your whole life been yours. It is now. I have been asked what I would have done if she had walked out. The truth is I would have let her go, and had the lands of her house restored to her, and lived out my reign with the wound of it, because a freedom you take back the moment it is inconvenient was never a freedom at all. I would have let her go. She did not go. She looked at me for a long moment, the seal still warm in her hand, and the mark still bright on her wrist, and the whole hall holding its breath. And then she did a thing I did not expect and have loved her for ever since. She did not fall into my arms. She reached down, deliberate, and she took a little of the ash from her own palm, the ash they had spent her life pressing on her as a mark of what she was, and she reached out and pressed it gently to the back of my kneeling hand, claiming me in the only coin she had ever been given, turning the mark of her lowness into the seal of her choosing. "On the longest day," she said so the hall could hear, "when you make me free I choose you, not the crown. You." And then, only then, she closed the last of the distance and put her ash-gray hand in mine, and I rose, and I set my own cloak about her shoulders over the gray shift, and the mark of my house, the moon of Hyrich, bloomed warm on her hand beside the moon of her own, the 2 houses meeting on one wrist, and the bond that I had spent my whole life fearing came home in me at last, not like thunder, but like a door I had been holding shut my whole life, finally being allowed to swing open into a lit room. They knelt then, the hall, but I want it set down truly, because this is the part that matters most and the part the tellings get wrong. They did not kneel in fear, and I did not make them grovel, and I have never in the years since let anyone in these hills speak of that day as the day the ash girl watched them all crawl. That is not what it was, and to make it that would be to make Wenna small in a different way. Idne knelt first, and she knelt in her error, which is the hardest kind of kneeling there is. I watched a proud woman look at the mark on the wrist of the girl she had kept by the fire for 22 years, and I watched her understand all at once the size of what she had done, not out of wickedness, but out of the small daily blindness that lets us decide a person is furniture, and I watched her choose in front of everyone to own it rather than defend it. "Forgive me," she said to Wenna, not to me. "I looked at you every day of your life and I never once saw you. That is my shame and I will carry it." And Wenna, who had more right than anyone alive to be cruel in that moment, went to her and raised her up with her own 2 hands and said, quietly, so that only those near heard it, "You gave me bread when you did not have to. I have not forgotten the bread. Let us begin again from the bread." Which is a thing I could not have done, and which taught me more about the woman I was marrying than the seal ever could. Rhea stepped back, and she stepped back with grace. She was kinder under the polish than her mother had had time to make her hard, as Wenna had said in the shrine, and she was the second to kneel, and the first to smile, and years later it was Rhea who ruled Dunkero well and justly, and Rhea who came to Highreach every longest day, and Rhea who stood as godmother to my son. And the law, the old law, the hearth bond, the custom older than the hold that turned foundlings into furniture, I ended it that night in the hall with Wenna's hand in mine. No servant taken in out of charity in any hold of Highreach would ever again be bound to a hearth as a thing to be inherited. That was the change that outlasted the feast and the marriage and even, one day, me. Freedom given to a girl who had none, and then written wide enough to cover every girl who came after. That, I think, is the only kind of vengeance worth taking on a wrong, to make certain it cannot be done again to anyone else. We were wed at Highreach under the first snow, which suited us. She had spent a life among ashes, and I wanted to give her a clean white world to begin in. The old shrine at Dunkero she would not let fall to dust. She had it restored, and the gray seal set back on its plinth, and once a year we go down to it together, and she presses her hand to it, and it wakes, and she stands a while in the light of her own dead house and lets herself be a daughter of it, 20 years too late and not too late at all. That is the story of the hearth I kneel at. She is queen now, and has been for a long time, and the Ash Girl is a name only she and I remember, kept on purpose, because a person should never throw away the whole of where they came from even after they have climbed all the way out of it. Her house is restored, and her lands are hers, and her son will hold them after her. The 9 flowers of the 9 holds long ago made their peace and dance at her table. And Idni, old now, and gone soft the way the hard ones do when they finally set the hardness down, Idni gets a loaf sent to her door every longest day from the Queen's own kitchen, warm, with the Queen's own thumbprint in the top of it, because Wenna decided a long time ago that she would rather answer a lifetime of small blindnesses with a lifetime of small kindnesses than carry the weight of being owed. I asked her once why she still does it, after all these years, when the woman can barely remember the wrong. "Because I remember it," she said, and pressed a little ash to the back of my hand, "and the remembering is the only chain I ever want to keep. It reminds me I was free before I was a queen. That is the part I never mean to lose." So on the longest day I kneel at the hearth in the low kitchen of Dunkero, and let my wife mark my hands with the ash they once meant to bury her in, and I am not humbled by it, and I am not ashamed of it. I am only a king who came very close to riding home with the wrong woman, and did not, and has spent every good year since learning what the world tried to throw into the fire. The light on the longest day will not go down until you are tired of it. We have never once been tired of it. We stay in the doorway until the last of the gold has gone off the pines, her hand in mine, 2 moons on one wrist, and then we go in together and bank the fire down for the night, the way she taught me, unhurried, making it ours.